And remember, the two major sources of income for Homeland Defense were war and space. Nixon began a process counter to the secret government and Homeland Defense, one of divesting the United States of its power and to bring us under the control of a world government through the United Nations. Nixon made numerous trips around the world, opened up China to the West, and began making peace with the Soviet Union. He then began a process of countering the secret government, by creating new government agencies whose agendas would run counter to the goals of the secret government. Perhaps his most treasonous act against America was in selling off the savings account of America, our gold. Meanwhile, the secret government was not standing idle waiting for their demise, but neither did they react, they planned. And the main plan was not just to get rid of Nixon, but to ensure that another Nixon could never become President of the United States again. Enter the Bushes. Before the Nixon faction knew what hit them, the military and intelligence communities created numerous scandals to bring them down. Not many people remember that Bob Woodward from the Washington Post and Watergate fame resigned his commission as a naval intelligence officer one day and the very next was working as a reporter for one of the most prestigious newspapers in the world. Within a few short years, Nixon's vice president had to resign, due to a never-ending stream of corruption charges. He watched as one by one his administration either turned on him, or were charged with crimes. He watched helplessly as his presidency turned upside down, and could see that the final outcome would be his impeachment. But in a final act of desperation orchestrated by his master gods, he brought the world to the brink of nuclear war in October 1973, but failed in this attempt when the military refused to give him access to the launch codes. And then, knowing his total defeat was at hand, he resigned his office. What had happened to Nixon and his minions was the direct result of an agreement between the secret government and the Bushes. After all, if anyone knew how to play this game, it was the Bush-Warburg family. They had, after all, been one of the major parties to the largest war in Earth's modern history and were still standing. So as Nixon was enduring his trial by fire, George Bush became a congressman. As a freshman in Congress, he was given the best committee choices, so as to better pad his resume. The next 30 years would see him as director of the CIA, ambassador to China, vice president, president, and the father of a president. But more than that, he was tasked with the plan to ensure that the secret government would never again be faced with a Nixon. To do that, he first had to plan the 1976 presidential election, and choose an obscure former naval military officer, who is presently the governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter. Bush knew that a Democrat in the White House would appease the American public after the ordeal of Nixon's last years. And Carter, like any good military officer, knew how to take orders. The first orders for Carter to carry out involved the cleaning out of both the military and intelligence communities of all of their Nixon-Kissinger spies. And to make sure the other side knew how serious the secret government was in ferreting out these moles, wholesale leaks of secret documents became an everyday experience. The bad guys fought back with everything they could. Russia invasion of a neighboring country? We didn't take the bait. The raising of oil prices? We didn't take the bait. The undermining of the American dollar? We didn't take the bait. The takeover of our embassy in Iran, the holding of our hostages? We didn't take the bait. What we were doing, however, was rebuilding our military forces, and in secret. We also were re-energizing NASA, with billions for the space shuttle. In other words, the secret government was again being funded. Both Carter and the secret government knew He could never be re-elected, but it didn't matter, because they all knew who was going to be the next president, and why. The next strike against the secret government was the attempted assassination of Reagan, but not for the reason you'd expect. The actual target was not Reagan but Bush. The plan was to make the assassination look like a conspiracy headed by the vice president. If the plan worked, not only would George Bush not be president, but also neither could his sons, or any of his network. But it didn't succeed, and retribution was swift in coming, or as swift century-old conspiracies usually work. Though President Reagan is credited with the largest peacetime buildup of U.S. military forces, the beginning of the buildup actually began with President Carter. During the Carter administration, the groundwork research was laid. Under Reagan it was implemented. Now the implementation of this plan called for hitting the bad guys where it hurt the most, in their pocketbooks. Remember the recessions of the late 1970s and early 1980s? Remember the lines of thousands of unemployed workers? Remember too that Nixon had sold off our gold, so what could we fall back on? Well, the answer was simple: debt. During the Reagan administration, we saw one of the largest rises in government and debt combined in our history.